Okay, we're going for it. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this afternoon. I think you all know what to do if the fire alarm goes. This meeting is being webcast live on the internet. And please, can all members and public switch their phones off or turn to silent. Welcome. Now, before we start the meeting, Kevin is in London this afternoon and therefore has substituted Dean to stand in his absence, and Dean went off sick this morning. So we have no officer to present paper D, the annual audit letter, and paper E, the Treasury Management mid-year report. They are both papers for noting. I suggest with the annual audit letter that we note it because absolutely nothing has been raised by the auditors which concerns us. Paper E, I'll take comments on, but I suggest we note it because the Q3 report will be coming back in February anyway. So there's no point deferring the paper until February. Are you happy with that? Yes. Okay. We have no apologies for absence and no substitutions. Any declarations of interest?
The usual RIPA, please.
Because you're a magistrate, I understand, Dan. Minutes of
I'm sorry, I always, if we mention KPMG, then I have to say my daughter-in-law works for them, albeit in Frankfurt, which is...
In the unlikely event that KPMG is mentioned...
Well, they are in the report, of course. That's the problem.
In the very, very small print. Minutes of the committee meeting held 21st of September, paper A. Is Councillor Parker.
I was just wanting to put my hand up. I'm sorry, I'll let you finish, Chair. I want to speak to the minutes, that's all.
Now's your chance.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pretty certain I recall that during the last meeting I raised a query over the comparison of the diversified funds and made a request at that meeting that we would receive information. Now, I know there's comment further on in the paper about that, but it's not minuted that I made a specific request that we had fund comparisons, not figures of how well the funds we've chosen have performed, but... Sorry? Where have I missed it?
Well, it's on page 675. You weren't the only one. Sorry, Chairman, I should speak to you.
I'm corrected. Thank you.
Right, at the pre-meeting last week, I was assured that these comparisons will be presented in the February meeting. So we haven't got them this time, but we will get them in February. Councillor Parker again.
I've deferred I've a further comment to make in relation to that on the paper.
Okay. Any other comments on the minutes? Councillor Keating.
And I note on page 8 of 75, the last page of A, that the committee requested an option paper to be brought to a future meeting. Now, I do understand a future meeting could be any meeting between here and 2025, but being as we only meet once a quarter, I would have expected it to be here by now. I don't see it. Thank you.
Looking at the Accounts Committee work plan, the audit consortium options are going to be discussed in April.
I knew that. Thank you. I was referring to the fact that being as we only meet once a quarter, That means if the previous meeting said we'll bring an options paper forward, people have got 3 months to do it. And I know they're busy. Believing me, I know they're busy. But it seems to me that it would have been rational and reasonable to expect it by now. Thank you. It's a comment I'm just making, that's all.
Chairman, Councillor Keating has obviously failed to note that we meet every 2 months. I think
we have 5 meetings over the year. Well, I'm not going to quibble over the difference. But it is scheduled for a future meeting. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to ask that that paper be brought forward to February if possible. Okay, apart from that, we happy with the minutes? Yes, happy. Paper B, our favourite ripper. Over to Jackie.
Thank you. This is the standard paper which provides the statistics for the use of RIPA. Following comments made at the last committee, we've now included the number of non-RIPA authorisations which have been sought and granted within the timescale. So the information is provided. We've had no formal RIPA authorisations. We have one joint operation involving RCSPOs where the police obtained RIPA authorisation, but RCSPOs were in uniform, so they were acting overtly rather than covertly in the operation. Viewing of social networking sites, and there have been no non-RIPA.
Any questions? Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I notice in the report provided, the external report which says how are we doing with this kind of stuff, that there is a suggestion we should have a subcommittee to be able to discuss these issues in private rather than on a public network like we're on today. And I thought that was a rational and a good suggestion, and I'd like to suggest or propose that we actually introduce such a subcommittee. Thank you.
What do you think of that, Jackie?
Personally, I don't have a problem with it. It does allow for a bit more information if councillors wanted further details that we couldn't perhaps discuss in open session. But it would be useful to understand exactly what further information might be found useful to discuss in such a forum.
Can I ask you, Jackie, if you could take that away and come back at the next meeting with some thoughts on that? Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else?
I'd just like to second Councillor Keating's suggestion, as it's not been.
I think that suggestion's now been taken on board. Anybody else? Councillor Keating.
Perhaps you could clarify what you mean when you say taken on board. Thank you.
I've asked Jackie to come back with some consideration on how such a meeting could be structured. Councillor Keating.
Well, you have a proposal from councillors which should not be subject to the even an informed comment from an officer. It's a very simple, straightforward issue. Should we do what the external examiners suggested, or should we not? It's not rocket science. Should we have a subcommittee to be able to discuss RIPA in a private setting rather than a public setting, which we're currently doing? Thank you.
I would like Jackie to comment on the implications of having such a subcommittee and come back at the next meeting. Now, if you want to vote on what is proposed and seconded, we can have it, if that is your wish. Councillor Parker.
I was leaving this till we got to the report, but we've strayed into that. And definitely in paragraph 6.6, page 16, the reviewing officer of our procedures inferred that this was potentially a weakness, that the information was being provided whilst there was webcast. And whilst we're very pleased to see the areas that they congratulate us on, I would suggest it would be prudent for us to take on board their, what I think is quite a strong steer, that it would be sensible to have a panel that can look at some of these matters in more depth, where it would be wrong for that detail to be provided while we're having a webcast meeting. So I think the issue for me is, I think the same as Councillor Keating, quite straightforward, Chair. We're responding to a recommendation from a review that's been conducted, and that is a sensible thing to do, and it's a question of, I would have thought today, asking who wants to be on the panel.
I would prefer it if my request to Jackie was left as it stands at the moment, that Jackie comes back to us with the all the implications of it. We will then have that motion on the next paper and we can vote on it, if that's okay with you. No comments? Councillor
Leak, I am. You'll get to know me after a time. As there have been no reports of RIPA being applied or whatever one does, what is it that this committee is going to do, and how frequently would it meet? I know Councillor Keating has been very keen to investigate RIPA and what we do, but we've had a nil report as long as I can remember. And therefore I'm just concerned that we set up a subcommittee that meets to discuss nothing. But perhaps I could ask, through you, Chairman, I could ask Jackie what.
You can go ahead and ask Jackie.
It's that level of information that I would need clarification on from members as to what exactly they'd expect to such a meeting. As I say, at the moment we provide statistics, how many authorisations there have been, and you're right, we have done no formal RIPA authorisations since 2009. Joint operations, they're very, very rare. This is the only joint operation that I'm certainly aware of since I've been involved in RIPA. Viewing of social networking sites, that's something that we do slightly more often now because it gives us the ability to undertake an initial investigation into an allegation, and our policy is such that we allow one viewing to see if the allegation is substantiated, if there is anything to it, and that's the single viewings that are reported here. If it's determined that further viewings might be necessary, then we ask for a formal application, whether that's a formal RIPA authorisation, if the the issue being investigated falls under the crime threshold of RIPA, or a non-RIPA, which is something that we've introduced here, which isn't something we have to do. And then the fourth item is, as I say, was asked for at the last meeting, how many times we've had a non-RIPA application. So it would really depend on what level of detail members wanted to discuss further. If it was a formal RIPA, then it is details of the investigation. But for the social networking sites, which at the moment is the bulk of what we do, it would be useful to know what the expectation is in terms of how much information is required.
Does that answer your question?
I mean, I've never understood why we had RIPA. I would have cameras on every rogue there was. So, I mean, I mean, I think I read somewhere that Councillor Keating didn't want people to be spotted throwing waste or something. Well, frankly, I'd chop their hands off, never mind spot them.
Your comment is noted. Councillor Keating.
Could I just ensure that people if they haven't listened to me before, they will need to listen to me now. I'm concerned about the reputation of this council. And if the reputation of this council is likely to be sullied or potentially sullied, then I am concerned that we do things correctly in accordance with the rules, and if the rules don't exist, we create rules. And that's what we as a council have got a good, long reputation for doing things well and for doing things in a correct process and a correct order. Now, we're talking about the regulation of the Investigatory Powers Act. The Investigatory Powers Act is a hugely onerous and strong ability for organs of the state to investigate people for all kinds of reasons. Now, I've never never expressed here any issues in relation to the Investigatory Powers Act 2000. I've not endorsed them, neither have I queried them. But when we as a council are applying those in accordance with the regulations, then we ought to apply them in a way that ensures that the reputation of this council is protected. I don't want to come to an audit and governance meeting and have the ability to say, why was that person investigated via the Powers Act 2000 for dropping a piece of litter? No, it wasn't food, by the way. It was a piece of litter, right? One piece of litter. Now, there was nothing wrong with having rules and regulations that people shouldn't drop litter. And we have such rules and regulations. What we're talking about here is using the excessive ability to use the investigatory powers of the 2000 Act in a form which is over zealous at the very least. And I don't want the power and reputation of this council to get to the point where we're using social media investigations under a hugely onerous Act of Parliament to investigate terrorism, which is what it was all about, to just for one person dropping one piece of litter. Now, that's my opinion, and I'm entitled to it. And because I'm entitled to it, I will express it. Thank you.
And your opinion is always one we value. Can we note paper B and move on to paper C? Thank you. Paper C, Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, outcome of inspection by the Officer of Surveillance. And if you turn to 2 of 3 on 11 of 75, there are 2 paragraphs which I propose to read out for the benefit of the tens of thousands watching on the web. Paragraph 6.1 refers to the Council's RIPA policy. This is an excellent document, one of the best seen during inspections to date. It is worthy of note that unlike some other authorities and law enforcement agencies that have lengthy and wordy policies, this one consists of a mere 18 pages, yet provides more guidance, advice and relevance than other policies examined of 5 times that volume. Para 6.2 also refers to our RIPA policy. This is an excellent initiative and an opportunity that many other authorities and law enforcement agencies overlook. And I would like to congratulate Jackie Tatum on this policy and the way that this document has been put together, for the excellent way that we have managed RIPA. So thank you, Jackie. And I would like that noted. Right. Is a tempting thoughts. Any questions on the paper? Yes.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that we consider the inspector's recommendation in their paragraph 6.3, which we've got on page 11 of 75, regarding the use of social media. Those that use social media will be familiar with the fact that you tend to track around. It's not a one view, one page sort of environment. And I would like to take the inspector's advice, which is to say we should not have a line in the sand, but make it easier so we don't become a bureaucracy on having to refer back just to look at more pages on more than one occasion. So I suggest we take the inspector's 6.3.
I'll refer that across to Jackie because we did discuss this last week.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. The inspector, his view and the view of the surveillance commissioners generally is that to go in to an open social networking account, and bear in mind we can't go in if their privacy settings are such that you have to be a friend to view it. So these are open sites. The backwards look is okay, however long that backward look takes. So it might be that you go in and you then go backwards through several pages to look at for the information that you're investigating. Taking a forwards look then falls within the monitoring or the potential monitoring of somebody, and then that falls under the description of surveillance. So that's the point he was making. His view was that our policy allows officers to go in once to have that backwards look, but if they feel that they need to go in more than once, then they need some form of authorisation, and it was that element that he believed was restrictive, i.e. the allowing the one view as opposed to maybe going in 2 or 3 times to have a view. And that's where he was coming from with that particular comment.
Councillor Keating.
Could I ask if the one viewing rule has been identified as a problem within this organisation?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Keating. However, if there is a view from officers, then it needs to come back to this committee before it's changed. Now, there was some discussion about paragraph 6.6. Now, on the previous paper we did, or I did, request Jackie to come back with some ideas on the implications of how such a meeting would work. But if anybody wants to actually put a proposal to this committee at this stage, now is the time to do it. Councillor Keating.
A point of clarification, Chair. We've already had a motion put and seconded. Are you suggesting we just redo it?
You had a motion proposed and seconded on the previous paper, which I left until this paper. So if you just want to leave it as it stands, we can go ahead and vote on it now. Okay. Now, this motion to have this meeting, I think we can just go ahead as you suggest, and let's vote.
For clarification,
If I can.
I think Councillor Keating is asking that the subcommittee or whatever it be set up immediately, but you have asked Jackie to advise this committee on the implications. So it seems to me we've got we tried to put the cart ahead of the horse, and I would have thought it was more appropriate that Councillor Keating allowed Jackie's report to come back before we actually determine it, because otherwise I shall have to vote against.
My view certainly would be that, irrespective of how this vote went, Jackie should still report on the implications of such a meeting, and we will look at it again when Jackie comes back, should we turn it down? If we vote in favour of it, it will still be subject to whatever Jackie comes up with in terms of a report. So, those in favour? Stuart.
No, not at all. Not at all. Listening to what's been said, as a reasoned Liberal Democrat, unlike others with entrenched views, I, Chair, would say that there's no rush in setting up the panel, and I think it would probably be wise to listen to what the officer's got to say in terms of A, the need, B, what would be being considered, and then D, whether in fact it will then feed information to this committee to really establish a proper purpose of setting up the panel. So whilst I'm a seconder to the motion for a panel, there's been further discussion since then, and I think the position's is more clearly understood. And so I would urge Councillor Keating just to defer to the fact that we get that information from the officer before we proceed with setting up a panel.
Councillor Keating, is that acceptable to you?
Yes, that is acceptable to me, Chair.
Right. Just referring back to Councillor Parker's last statement, I'm glad he admits there are some Liberal Democrats with entrenched views, though he isn't one of them.
That wasn't what I said, Chair.
Sounded very like it. Right, can we note paper C and move on? Thank you. Paper D, the Audit and Accounts Committee. We don't have an officer to present. However, the report is fairly bland. There are no issues raised. The auditors were happy with everything. We've seen the accounts before. Can we just note the report and move on?
Particularly since we're not going to see them again anyway.
A fond farewell. Oh, sorry, Councillor Parker, did you want to speak?
We are on paper E, are we, Chair?
Sorry, I was just about to... just finishing paper D, we're just about to move on to paper E. You will get your chance. There are no officers present to make the report or to answer questions. I was asked if I wanted to defer this paper until February, when we will be looking at the Q3 report anyway. My view is if we have any questions, can we email them to Kevin? Can we note the report and look forward to the report coming back as a Q3 report in February?
Sorry, Chairman.
That's all right, Councillor Lake.
I would much prefer that the officer actually took down the questions so that we all hear what the questions are. And we would normally each raise our own questions and have a response. So I think we deserve to hear everybody's comments, and hopefully we will equally get their response, but it would be better if it was now. Preparing yet another email is something I'm trying to avoid. It's easier to speak and more interesting.
I'm happy with that. If anybody has got any questions, bearing in mind they won't get answers at this time, but they can be noted. This, Councillor?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment that I made at the last meeting. If you look at page 38 of 75 as one example, is that it's saying 9.2. It says the overall return on investment is forecast to be 0.31% lower. In fact, it's 14.28% lower. And if you go through the other figures at 9.5, the returns from liquidity cash, which are 0.15% lower, that actually is 25% lower than the forecast. So I'd like to see those figures as well, because 0.31% is an absolute figure, it's not the relative percentage performance. So when we look at our overall investments, we're actually something like 25% down, which is rather more dramatic than, say, a 0.31%, and I think that gives a more realistic view of our investment performance.
Hear what you say, but the report is factually correct in what it says. It's just it's not comparing what you would like to see. So certainly that is something that could be taken as a question and refer back to Kevin. Councillor Leake.
The paper isn't factually correct, actually, because if you look on page 36 of 75, there are two tables, and I think one should say 1303-2015, not 2014, if we're really going to be pedantic. But more to the point, I want to speak on 10.2, which is on page 36 of 75, which says the Council invested in diversified credit funds in order to gain access to the income distributions and, quotes, is less concerned with the total return as it anticipates holding these funds in the longer term. Well, I disagree with that. Total return is the benefit of the gain over the period you hold it plus the income. And that is going to be important to us. And I don't think that is a correct statement, and I think it should be corrected, frankly. I totally agree. Thank you very much, Councillor Parker.
I think if we added the words short-term total return, that would probably be...
There is no such thing as a short-term total return. Total means the gain over the period of holding it, combining the income and the capital gain or loss.
I think we're arguing over semantics. But I agree with what you say. If that can be referred back, that it is the long-term total return which is relevant. Short-term fluctuations are of less concern. Councillor Parker.
It is just on that same point that's been raised by Councillor Leake, Chair, if I may. The question I had for the officers was, what's their view of longer term? Is longer term 3 to 5 years? It is. It's not.
3 to 5 is what it says in the paper.
No, it refers to longer. It says that they're calling that longer. I mean, it's either got to be factually right. It says on 10.2, it says anticipates holding these funds in the longer term. Opens brackets 3 to 5 years. All my understanding while I've been on this committee, that's not the longer term.
Councillor Fillmore.
Yes, Chairman. I'm listening to what I've heard from Councillors Faulkner, Leake and Stewart here. Can I say that we're all desperately disappointed with the average overall return of our investments?
The main reason being, of course, that interest rates have not gone up as fast as we had anticipated. And that is true of any investment.
But then surely the strategy is looking where the council is investing its money.
Which is what is going to be happening within Treasury management anyway. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Staying with the rate of return, we're being given information about the rate of return and the reduced income as a consequence of that in those investments. But we hired a very expensive finance managers, external, last year. Spent big bucks in selecting them and big bucks in hiring them, and we're not being given the comparison figures. What did they promise versus what they delivered? And that's what I would expect to see in this form of document. Thank you. I have another different query. Do you want me to raise it now, or do you want to finish the
raise it now?
Okay. I go to page 37 of 75, 8.4, underneath the diagram. The first sentence says, typically the council would aim to be in the top left-hand corner. Then the second line says, the most recent benchmarking results show the council with a return well above best fit or linear trend. It's not using the same criteria one sentence to the next. If you're going to say it should be in the top left-hand corner, we should then be saying, where are we now? Which corner? But it's not. It's saying, oh, by the way, the criteria in future will be the best fit or linear trend line. This is confusing to people like me. Could you perhaps ask for a better explanation?
We can ask for a better explanation on
Please.
that point. Yes. Councillor Leake.
Thank you, Chairman. I did mention to you just before this meeting that I was going to raise this point, namely
Go ahead and raise it.
Namely that we are putting more and more money into Invest to Grow. Now, I don't know to whom a report is given on the returns we're achieving. It might be the performance panel, but it certainly hasn't come here. And if we're really looking at treasury management, and if we are diverting some of the funds that we would otherwise have available for investment in deposits or whatever, and to use that for Invest to Grow, then I think we should be seeing the returns that we're achieving. And I don't just mean the return once the thing's up and running, because some of this is going into property and there's a lead time, so we're spending the money before we get any return. So one would want to look at the average return over the period of ownership. But I do think that should be built into this as well, so that we can, if in future there are further requests for Invest to Grow, then we can see whether we are getting a favourable return or not as compared to the money we have in the various markets. That's my point.
Hear what you say, but I think once it goes to Invest to Grow, it ceases to become within the remit of Treasury Management. So it wouldn't necessarily be part of this report. There may be a space for it in a different report.
Well,
but it probably does go to the performance panel.
May or may not, but I do think it would be sensible that it comes here as well. Even if there was a report that went to the performance panel, then that ought to be attached to the Treasury Management. So, as I said earlier, that we can compare the returns we were getting on Invest to Grow with those that we're getting on these deposits and other investments, because we may say, gosh, better to have a bit more in Invest to Grow, or the other way around. I don't know. We need to see the return. But it's not just comparing the rental income from the surgery in South Ham from the date we suddenly receive income. It's actually looking, because there would have been a period when we didn't get any rent. So we've got to look at, average that income over the period of ownership. But I think it's something you should be looking at. But if
We'll ask the question of Kevin. Councillor Keating, you had us.
Thank you. As chair of the performance panel, I can reliably inform you that the performance panel does not receive any additional financial information other than the information that we get. So, or the council as a whole gets, right? So there is no additional document looking at a subset of what we're talking about here in terms of Invest to Grow. There is no additional document to that effect that goes to the performance panel. Now, there may well be documents of that nature that go to the cabinet member or whatever, but they don't go to the performance panel. And if they exist, that is. I'm not sure they actually exist. So I'm reliably informing this committee that the performance panel does not receive any such additional information. So I also wanted to ask a clarification, if I may, Chair. I asked a question in relation to the rate of return versus the advisor's expected rate of return, because we hired them to give us a rate of return that they promised, and they're failing. They're failing against their own criteria, are we going to get that information? Is the question I wanted to ask you, Chair.
Well, that is a question for the officer. We are getting a report back in February. Councillor Parker, and if you could pull that microphone a bit closer to you. I don't want to miss a word.
Thank you, Chair. We're dodging backwards and forwards here, but it's just unfortunate. I mean, I had other comments I wanted to make. Seem to be making comments, but it was questions, but the officer isn't here, so it's very difficult. But it seems to be on the same theme. So it is important. In terms of the externally managed funds, we, on page 39, we have all the detail of the income generated, and this is a query that I have, and I quite regularly do have concerns over the way the information is presented, and I appreciate this is accountants providing information. They're not public relations or communication experts, but we have the situation here where on 10.3, page 39 of 75, that goes into the detail of the income and the percentage of the income. But it's not. You have to wait till further in the report that you can properly understand the implication of this investment, because for this so-called improvement in income, we've already sacrificed over £500,000 capital. This isn't actually shown here clearly as it should be. I'd like to ask the question of the officers in this respect, is referring to paragraph 15.1, page 41, is first of all, this paragraph 15.1 seems to be implying that whilst they call themselves management advice consultants, we accept total responsibility for treasury management, and that's in the case of Arling Close Limited, and KMPG are the investment advisory, but we don't. There seems to be different rules applying here. My question I want to ask, and I'm sure if someone's no doubt cleverer than me is going to tell me to refer to the budget book, I'd like to be reminded what we are paying. It's been referred to, but it would be nice, I think, at this juncture to be reminded, what are we paying these people for this investment advisory that's not seeming to be going very well, and also the treasury management advice. I'd like to be advised of that, and also I would query on page 42, paragraph 19.2, we have this bold statement: the investments in diversified credit funds have an increased exposure to credit risk in order to generate enhanced returns. Well, I think maybe that's a little bit too bullish. It perhaps ought to be in an attempt to generate enhanced returns. Order implies that it's going to. Well, it certainly hasn't done now, and it's probably unlikely to consistently do in the future. So I would suggest that wording is more modified.
Councillor Parker would point out that that is compared to the return we would get on short-term funds, which is derisory at the moment. So in terms of the diversified funds, they are getting a better return, about 4 times what we are getting on short-term funds, although it isn't as high as was originally intended. Councillor Leake.
I disagree. That's only talking about income. This is talking about in order to generate enhanced returns. If you've sacrificed capital to generate supposedly better returns, that's not enhanced returns. And I think it's a point that Councillor Leake made. It's just not. It's not enhanced total returns. The actual statement is not correct.
You can't look at these things in the short term. There will be fluctuations. Markets as a whole are down at the moment. They will recover. I'm sorry, Councillor Leake.
The point, Chair, is not, you're wrong, the point is not short, long or whatever. It's actual total returns.
Chairman, at the beginning of the meeting, I said my daughter-in-law worked for KPMG, but this says KMPG, so she doesn't work for them, but but I think it's meant to be KPMG. Just
Councillor
in case.
Leake, I'd just like to assure you we do not hold your daughter personally responsible.
However, I did want to raise a similar point to that raised by Councillor Parker, and I want to draw your attention to page 47 of 75, where we do actually show the unrealised loss. And this is a question that I want to ask before you lucky members of this committee next year will be reviewing the accounts. I fortunately won't. Well, I might come just to the public and ask a few questions. Historically, where we've had gilts and we've made a loss or made a gain, we haven't reflected that in the accounts on the grounds that we were going to hold to maturity, and I totally understand that. But these funds don't have an end date. You sell them at some point, and you either make a gain or you make a loss. So I would be interested to know how this loss, if it was the position at the 31st of March next year, would be reflected in the accounts, because we've been told that there's a loss of, sorry, not a loss, that we're going to be drawing 300 and something thousand from the reserve. Well, if we have to reflect this loss on the grounds that it may not ever be made up, that would actually change the amount that might have to be withdrawn from the reserve. So I would like to ask, through you, through officers, if we could have an answer to that one, please.
That question has been noted. John, I'm sure you don't do anything for nothing. If we have finished with questions on that paper, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the officer isn't here, but certainly Councillor Leake is, and so I'm going to, through you, I may just ask for his assistance in better understanding. I know the point that you've made, John. It is refer to that page, if you would be so kind, page 47. Yes, yes. Where I noted, this is something that I had just noted, Chair, and I think we can be helped by Councillor Leake on this. It's headed unrealised valuation, gains and losses, which I understand the implication of that wording. And under internally managed long-term bonds, we have local authority bonds, we have it records a written down value. But I assume that's because it's only it's not realised, it's just a written down value. And is that a similar point that you're making, where on the externally managed funds, whilst currently they're showing an unrealised loss, the M&G Alpha opportunities of 294,932, an unrealised capital loss because we're not cashing it in, and the M&G total return of 214,000, whilst it doesn't have a written down value.
I think the difference, through you, the difference is that the local authority bonds and the gilts both have an end date. Yes, and therefore the argument officers make is that they're not going to realise the gain or indeed the loss. They're going to hold them to maturity, and therefore there will neither be gain nor loss, which is fine because you've got an end date, but you haven't got an end date on these M&G investments. That's just a market price.
I think that answers the question. Any others? Councillor Tilbury, good afternoon.
Yeah, no, just to say, obviously, with interest rates, I think, I can't find it in this report, but somewhere in here it says about we expect interest rates to go up about this or next year sometime. Yeah. And I think if we went back to every report we've had in the last 5 years, it would have said exactly the same thing. And interest rates haven't gone up, and frankly, I don't see them going up. And if they do, that'd be the least of our worries, because if they went back to where they were when I was first on the council, when we were getting about £10 million a year just in interest, then I think it would be good for us as a council, but it would be very bad for the residents, because half of them would be losing their houses. Yeah, so any long-term sort of policy that relies on interest rates rising is not good anyway. I think we at some point we've got to start looking at how we invest our money, and I think to a certain extent the to grow one is invest to grow is a sort of that's what I think they're trying to look at that way forward. But so we're not getting any reports back on what's happened with that. There's the infamous cost of coffee one, but we've not heard how's that actually doing, and that's sort of 2 years down the line now. So I think we do need this information, because it's lost. I mean, the other obvious one, the other invest to grow one we had years ago was, of course, 3EN, which some people will remember, which managed to invest £1 million and ended up with nothing. So, one of the problems we had on this committee, we kept asking about it over many years. We said, well, what's happened with the money? Are we going to see any return? And it just kept knocked into the long grass all the time, didn't it? And that's the worry with a lot of these other things, that we're investing this money to grow, but is it actually growing? We don't know, do we? And that's the point. It's, Treasury management, we're very good at that, and I think the point that was made, I think Stuart made earlier, that over the years we bring these professionals in to do that. By the time you add their charges on there, consistently they cost us more money than our own staff, who are actually quite good at treasury management. Which we've known and have been consistently good at looking after our money. Yet whenever we bring in the outside experts, they may actually get a slightly better return, but by the time you pay their fees, you're no better off. And I think that's something we need to look at, the relative performance of the two groups, because otherwise there's no point in employing our own people. If we're going to employ people outside and pay them a lot of money, it's good for creating unnecessary employment in the city, possibly, but I don't think it's doing us any good as a council. Thank you.
Well, the point on Invest to Grow was raised earlier, so that question has been asked. In terms of 3N, as I recall it, we eventually got about 600,000 for the rest of our investments when we wound that up. So we certainly didn't end up with nothing. And during the life of 3N, it did recycle a lot of money into the borough and created a lot of employment. So it wasn't a wasted exercise by any means.
We did start off with £1 million, which over a long period
We
of time
did a
turned
lot
into
through
lot
that
less.
money during the time that 3M was operating.
Yeah.
Right. Councillor Fillmore, have you got a question there? You look expectant.
Come on. Yes, Chair. Yes, Chair. Sorry to interrupt your amusement. As a relative newcomer, only been on here about 6 months, and unfortunately you're stuck with me for 4 years. I'd just like to ask, 18 months ago, as far as I'm aware, the investment strategy changed. Is that true? And is that new investment strategy actually working?
It's true.
18 months down the line, it's very early to say, but it's one of the questions we can ask Kevin. Okay.
Chairman, sorry.
Councillor Leake.
We've only had first investments in these funds was only made earlier this year or late last year, so we haven't had 18 months, and the last 10 million only went in October, according to this paper. So we haven't given it a fair crack of the whip, and it has been extremely difficult. I know from my own involvement that investments of this sort have been quite difficult because of the expectation of interest rates rising and then falling back because China went into a recession and this, that, and the other. So we do need to... yes, because that's all about investment, and it's trying to beat the reasons.
Life is what happens. However, John, I think you are possibly talking at cross purposes with Councillor Fillmore, because I'm not sure which investment strategy he's referring to. Certainly the one you're referring to is a short-term one. We've only just made the investments, I would agree. Councillor Putty.
Chairman, I actually agree with Councillor Leake what he has really said about invest grow if we can have something to show us what is happening periodically, especially, I think is up to what he means, but at least if we can really find something. On the risk issues here, I find at 19.3 and 19.2, we are talking about people with expertise at 19.2, and the return from the externally managed funds are expected to be more volatile than returns from the council internally managed investment. And we have to have more or less proof of it. And then when we go on, we are talking about should be seen as a medium to long-term investment, 3 to 5 years. Have we got some of these investments which are fixed so that we know that where we're going with it? Is it variable, on variable grounds, where we don't really know, and we are exposed to a high risk?
Councillor Patty, I don't know how long you've been on this committee, but it has been said all along, and it's been said again this afternoon, that these investments are market investments. They do not have a fixed term. They're not going to run to maturity, and they will be running until such time as we decide we want to realise them. So,
Chairman, I think you've got it the wrong way round. I think Councillor Putty is concerned, as I understood it, that we have no fixed interest investments, and that is not correct. Most of our income is fixed because we've got the gilts, which is fixed, and we've got various local authority loans, etc. So the bulk of our money is actually fixed. So he can be assured that it isn't completely all high risk.
Thank you for that correction, Dan. I think the object of this was it would be fluctuating, it wouldn't be guaranteed, but it would be higher than we will get elsewhere. And as we're getting very low returns on our current accounts at the moment, this was a wise move. It's getting us more income for the benefit of our residents, which is a good thing. And that is something this committee should be proud of. Any other... Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Could I elaborate on the point that Councillor Phillimore was talking about? The reality is we did change strategy and we did change practice about 18 months ago, which was implemented in the very earlier part of this particular year, and it was actually, the investments took effect from, I believe, April, 5th of April. No, it would be the 6th of April. Councillor Phillimore was absolutely right that we did change our arrangements, we changed our practices and policies, and we agreed to hire external advisors. And we didn't actually get a figure for their fee, by the way. We got all kinds of good reasons why we couldn't fix the figure. But the reality is we're not getting a good rate of return. I know it's early days, but it's the early days that are ignored often. The trend that we are currently going on is a downward trend. If that continues for the next 6 months, it'll be next autumn before we look at the final year results. And the reality is, if that downward trend continues, we will be seriously embarrassed for having changed our strategy, hired at expense external advisors, and we're getting a worse rate of return. Thank you.
I beg to differ. I think we're getting a better rate of return. It's just not as high as we had anticipated. Can we move on? Thank you. Paper F, protecting the public purse, set for code of practice on managing the risk of fraud and corruption, self-assessment. Mr. Gundry. Yeah. Open to questions. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. I refer to page 55. Well, actually, the heading is B3, which is on page 54. The organisation uses published estimates of fraud loss. On page 55, it talks about this tool that's being used, the CIFA fraud tool, identifying a lower estimate of 900,000 and an upper estimate of nearly 1.5. But the actions required is shown as none, and I would query that.
Any more questions? Councillor Parker, carry on.
Yes, I'm just wondering then why we're given that information. It's this then exactly what are we trying to achieve here in terms of us receiving this information? Do we not, the fact that we can identify using that tool, does some action appear somewhere else in some other function of another department? That's what I'd like to know.
Any other questions? Note the report. Sorry, Mr. Councillor Putty.
Thank you, Chairman. Where are we with regards to the development of cyber risk policy?
Councillor Parker.
This is so very low key, but I find I just have to make the point, Chair. Maybe next time when we get such a report, we can do away with the vibrant yellow cross that seem to keep some ones that got the type of lens I've got. I'm constantly having to struggle to keep my eye going to the right rather than going to the left.
Okay, we can note that. Move on to paper G, which is also for noting, the Corporate Risk Register, which is also Mr. Gundry.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Gundry, I'm just told that Your mic is not working on the web for some reason. Can you change microphones?
Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to start that again?
I think that would be wise.
Yep, okay. Thank you, Chair. This report is to inform members of the committee the 11 corporate risks that have been identified by the senior management group of the council. Okay. I have updated Appendix 1 for you, which was at the request of the Chair following the Chair's briefing, because it didn't actually include the controls that were in place to mitigate each of the risks, so hopefully you've all got a copy of that with you. I just want to also mention to members of the committee that I will be bringing this report to you every 6 months, so you can monitor the progress of each of these risks, and again, if there's any new risks that are added by the senior management team, that they'll be there for you to. I'll highlight those for you to take forward. So the next committee which will receive a risk report will be April 2016. So over to questions. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. With the revised appendix that's now got significantly a great deal more content, which we've not had opportunity to read in detail, might I just ask through you, Chair, that if it be at all possible, having studied this later, if we individually do have any query, we could just make a request to Paul by email.
I would second that, and if any questions could then come back as a report to the next meeting of this committee, we can then share it between us. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. The first risk in relation to the leadership and decision making refers to historically the council has been envisaged no overall control. Certainly since 1995, this is the first year we've had proper overall control by one political party. By one political party.
Yeah, when you were leader, yeah. No, I was. Not the, yeah, sort of the first year, the second. Yes.
Yeah.
We had overall control then.
The point I was making, nonetheless, was that it really giving hostages to fortune to talk about the May election brought in an overall majority which provides an opportunity for clear direction. The next election could well do the same thing. Yeah, increase our majority. It could well change the majority. It could change it to a minority.
We'll have your say.
And the reality is, having got lots of experience of managing the council without overall control by one political party, it's not unusual for councils up and down this country to be managed by coalitions. Neither is it unusual for the government to be managed by a coalition. So I wouldn't have thought that it should be identified as a risk. It is not a risk. It is a fact of life which reflects the population voting. And you cannot control that risk. You cannot control that risk. And I don't believe it should be identified as a risk. Because it is not a risk that this council is able to control. The only risk that should be on here are those risks which we can influence or mitigate. That's the general point I wanted to make, and I was going to make that point before I got the 44 additional pages. So I'll come back to this issue at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tilbury.
Yeah, I was going to make very much the same point. I was a bit, because it is on the original paper, but to suggest it can lead to a delay in service delivery, wasted resources and low staff morale, well, I mean, staff morale, if you look at staff morale in a lot of places, it's actually worse when you get one party takeover. Usually, you know, I've had a lot of dealings with other councils where it's gone from one major party to another one, which often it flips from one to the other. Round here we've had no overall control and similar sort of makeup of the council in the time I've been on the council there. But if you look at areas where it's gone from one party to another, and with a very large majority, the staff morale often gets far worse because the sort of things they're then asked to do, they may have real problems with. So I think you can't say that that's an issue there. I mean, the worst councils I've seen are not generally those with no overall control, because you do get a bit of give and take then. You know, I mean, they do occasionally listen to us, but they've got a small majority there. The real problem you get is when you get a one-party control and the infighting is between the members of their own party usually, and it doesn't matter who they are, because across the country I've had dealings with a lot of councils where the councillors are fighting amongst themselves rather than the opposition, because there is no real opposition. In some parts of London you've got, you know, areas where there's one party runs everything, and you know, parts of Hampshire is virtually that, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit. I don't think it's, as Sean said, I don't think you can say it's a risk. It's one of those issues there, but to suggest that some, because the implication of this is that what we really need is clear decision making by one party, and if we're setting that up as a basis of the way forward, certainly as an independent, I'd have real problems with that, because I think it's pretty unlikely we're going to have a totally independent run council. Yeah. I know there are some in Wales, I think, and on the borders there, because they are a bit like that over there, aren't they? I mean, they're still a bit, it's that Celtic influence, isn't it? But again, but the reality is the idea that, you know, having a one-party state or very large control is a good thing. Not in my experience, it's not, and it certainly doesn't seem to work in government. Thank you, Chair.
I think the risk of changes in control of the council, although it is outside the control of this council, the effects can still be mitigated against in terms of staff morale. Now, I'll put Mr. Gundry, which is to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the comments that I've received today back to the strategic leadership team when they're reviewing, when they do the next review of the risk register, and to see whether it should actually remain in the register.
Thank you. Anybody else? In which case, Councillor Parker.
In view of Paul's last comment, then I would add my support to the comments that have been made by Councillor Tilbury and Councillor Keating. If you read it in isolation, it's effectively almost a political statement. And it shouldn't be on this paper.
No comment. Moving on. Paper H. Right, the work plan. Now, I understand there are some changes.
Good afternoon, members. The changes to the work programme for the next few meetings. The EY grant certification report should read PwC grant certification report. We also have where are the other two bits? We've got the corporate risk register is coming back again. I'm just trying to find it on in April's meeting. That's the one. And we also have we've also got the fraud coming back in April as well. So there is an updated work plan that's been circulated this afternoon, but those are the changes from the one that's published in the agenda.
Based on last week's meeting, I understood we were looking at accounting policies in April as well.
Yes, and and we've got the fee letter as well. The accounting policies and fees letters coming back too.
Great joy. Noted. Thank you. There being no other business, I declare the meeting closed.